The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
The morning lift has been canceled off due to weather, so you'll have to go back inside and wait.
Amongst the groans, I felt a flutter of relief. Good, I said to myself. I didn't know why, and it felt too irrational to articulate to anyone else, but I had a terrible feeling about the jump. It was like a sixth sense. Something inside me was screaming not to do it. Victoria Cilliers, from her book, I Survived, a True Story. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. This is episode 143, Falling, Part 2 on I Survived, a True Story by Victoria Cilliers. In Part 1, episode 142, we just clicked, which I highly recommend you listen to before Part 2, we met Victoria Cilliers, Vicky, who shared her story of growing up in Haddington, UK, joining the Royal Army Medical Corps as a physio or physical therapist, her deployment to Kosovo, her love for skydiving, and her first marriage that ended due to his infidelity. Now, Vicky has met and married Emile Cilliers, a South African who swept her off her feet with his love, attention, and devotion. They've welcomed their first child, April. But a concern has arisen over some odd withdrawals from their account, money going missing, and red letters indicating missed payments showing up in the mail. Trying to discuss this with Emile, he lashes out angrily and tells Vicky this was caused by his pay not being processed correctly, and he withdraws his love from her, refusing to speak to her, sometimes for days, leaving the whole situation very uncomfortable. Vicky is uncertain what to do, rationalizing that all married couples have financial up and downs, that it just isn't worth getting into it, that their life is really nice since the only thing they argue about is money. Now, I also shared some critical insights on love bombing and gaslighting, which I believe are affecting Vicky in her relationship. Vicky wanted to trust her husband. Emile had been affectionate towards her and their daughter, so she tried to set aside her worries about their bank accounts and just focus on their lives together. However, she did have concerns about their house. It was an older one, and the yard had steep slopes and drops, which were definitely not child-friendly. Emile suggested moving, but Vicky wondered if they could afford it. After making an appointment with the bank to discuss their finances, it quickly and embarrassingly became obvious that Emile's money trouble was a blight, and the unpaid bills had caused Vicky's credit rating to drop badly as well. How has she ended up in this situation? Now Emile suggested using the inheritance that Vicky had received from her grandmother. However, Vicky still doubted the amount would cover the cost of a new house and was still in shock from the banker's frank assessment. Emile then proposed that she ask her brother Chris for a loan. Well, Vicky considered this, and when she asked, Chris happily agreed. They would pay him back each month instead of going through a bank. But their dad insisted that the deed would be in Vicky's name alone and that Emile and Vicky sign a post-nuptial agreement. This meant that if they divorced, they would leave the marriage with what each had contributed, favoring Vicky since the family was supporting the purchase of the house. And they found a new house with an enclosed garden for April to play in, conveniently located near a park. Vicky loved it, but she worried about the monthly repayments to Chris. Emile promised that he would cover the majority of the payment each month. And while Vicky wanted to believe him, she was haunted by their unpaid debts and feared Emile would never repay Chris, who had been so generous with them. Would Emile's unreliability create a significant rift in their family? Well, Vicky's worries proved prophetic. For the first few months, the payments were processed without any issue. However, then she began receiving notices of misdirected transfers. Emile claimed that there was another mix-up at work, something she found hard to believe. She suspected he was lying, but how could she prove it? Eventually, the responsibility of paying the bills fell solely on Vicky. And another issue emerged: her parachuting. After becoming pregnant, she had continued to teach the sport, but stopped jumping herself. And over time, what had started as a fun hobby shifted to a job necessary to pay the mortgage. She had lost her passion for it, and it also took her away from home too often. And Vicky wanted to prioritize her daughter and her husband. Parachuting was just not worth it, and it had its risks. Vicky was now 38 years old, and she wanted to have another child. So she and Emile needed to act quickly, despite their shaky finances. Emile continued spending money wildly, but she hoped that the prospect of a second child, or a sixth if anyone was actually counting, would inspire him to settle down. When she suggested the idea to Emile, he thought it was wonderful. However, after a year of trying to conceive, Vicky had still not become pregnant. They decided to undergo testing to determine if something was wrong, and the doctor requested a sperm sample from Emile. A few weeks later, while making an appointment to review the testing, the receptionist asked Vicky to bring in Emile's results. So she said to him, "Hun, will you have these sent over?" While bouncing April on his lap, Emile was dismissive, saying the results were fine. Well, did he have any paperwork that he could give the doctor? At this, Emile simply shrugged no. Now, deep down, Vicky knew he had never been tested and he was lying. But not wanting to start an argument, she let it slide, fighting back tears. Why didn't he care? Why was she dealing with this alone? Well, about a week before her appointment with the specialist, Vicky's intuition kicked in and she decided to do a pregnancy test, which came back positive. Excitedly, she bounced into the kitchen and announced that baby number 2 was on the way. However, Emile's response was tepid and nowhere near the enthusiastic reaction it had been when they found out about April. Feeling let down, he didn't even hug her. And this would mark a significant shift in his behavior. Shortly thereafter, a friend whose 16-year-old daughter had been babysitting April called Vicky. The mom awkwardly explained that Emile had been texting her daughter inappropriately. Shocked and in disbelief, Vicky defended Emile, insisting he would never do such a thing. However, the screenshots were texted to Vicky, showing up one by one. Quote, "Do you have a boyfriend? You look really nice this evening." End quote. As Vicky read them, she felt sick, her hands shaking, the same response when she had found out that ex-husband Liam was cheating on her. Apologizing and feeling mortified, Vicky knew she had to confront Emile. He vehemently denied it, claiming that his phone must have been cloned or that his account had been hacked. She showed him the screenshots. Angry and growing aggressive, he shouted at her, quote, "How can you not believe me? Do you really think that little of me?" End quote. He was the victim here. He stormed out of the house, leaving a bewildered Vicky. Her thoughts rolled around and around in her head. Why would Emile flirt with a 16-year-old? He couldn't have done this, as her guilt overwhelmed her. She should have trusted him. The next morning, with April headed to the childminder and Vicky to work, she realized that Emile had taken her car. Getting into Emile's older car, she opened the glove compartment and the order for the sperm sample test fell out. Quote, "He never did see the GP about his fertility," I realized, letting my head fall in my hands. He had lied to me. End quote. But she never asked him about it. She was pregnant now, and it wasn't worth dredging it up. Then on the family computer, messages started popping up from a sex club. Asking Emile about this, he seemed surprised, but quickly composed himself, admitting that, yeah, he received them occasionally, because he used to go there with his ex-wife, Carly. Vicky knew he was lying. After receiving none, how could messages suddenly appear out of nowhere because he had been there years ago? Well, a week later, even more disturbing messages showed up. Quote, "I had a great time tonight," from an unknown woman, to which Emile responded, "Yeah, me too." End quote. Confronting the lying cheater, he denied it, condescendingly insisting his account was hacked. Shouting, he said, quote, "Don't put your own issues on me. Just because your ex-husband cheated on you doesn't mean you can be paranoid with me." End quote. And that hit home. Vicky began to wonder if he wasn't right. Was she being paranoid? He spent hours making dinners he thought that she would enjoy, then snuggling up to watch a movie together. He rarely went out or was even interested in going out. When did he actually have time for some sex club or another woman? Then Vicky found a receipt from a restaurant for 2 meals, one being a salad and white wine, which sounded distinctly female, and he denied the receipt was his. Determined to catch him in a lie, when Emile went out to buy some carpet cleaner after April had an accident on the rug, when he returned, Vicky compared the dinner club receipt with the carpet cleaner receipt, and the credit card numbers matched. Emile flew off the handle, cutting her off. Quote, "Wow, Vicky, I think you're losing it. Now you're checking my receipts?" End quote. She insisted she wasn't losing her mind, but he wouldn't let her speak, blaming her behavior on insecurity stemming from her ex, and he called her crazy. Framed that way, it sounded absurd to her, and her self-doubt deepened, and she ended up apologizing for offending him. Oh boy. Her pregnancy was progressing, though Emile never accompanied her to her doctor's appointments. He insisted that he couldn't take time off work for something like a scan. Vicky was exhausted, balancing a full-time job and all the childcare responsibilities. All of the preparation for the baby fell to her as well, and she was haunted by the constant fear of hemorrhaging again, as she had when pregnant with April. And their financial troubles persisted. The small amounts that were being withdrawn from their savings started increasing. When she asked him about it, Emile always had an excuse, claiming it was a mix-up or a mistake. It was never his fault. Then 100 pounds disappeared, and Vicky found herself hoping Emile would take care of it, but he never did. Despite earning more than Vicky, he left her to handle all their bills and expenses. And she was fearful of losing him, wondering how she would manage with a baby and a toddler on her own. She couldn't see that she already was. After noticing more unauthorized charges on her account, she called the bank to report them. Now she waited for her new card to arrive, but it never showed up. And meanwhile, the money continued to be withdrawn from her account. Emile suggested that someone had intercepted her new card, and he was right. Later, going through some paperwork, she discovered the stolen card hidden among Emile's documents. More lies. In response, she changed her passwords and closed her online banking, but Emile still managed to siphon off money from her account. She felt desperate to protect herself and the children from his reckless spending, seething with frustration. They could not continue like this, but she was scared. With a toddler and a new baby on the way, she worried that ending the relationship would mean losing any support. She was truly in a difficult situation, and his manipulations were taking a heavy toll on her. Next, he began spending more and more time away from home, volunteering for weekend duties. Oh, yeah, right, I believe that. And signing up for competitive skydiving. On the British Skydiving National's Facebook page, Emile was seen cozying up with various attractive women, clearly drunk. And Vicky wanted to die. These people knew them both. When he was away, he never called. And when he did call, he needed her to pick him up because his car had been impounded. Apparently, shocker, the insurance had lapsed. Oops. But she still went and picked him up and even paid the insurance bill. One night, they were out with friends, and their phones were sitting around on the table when a notification pinged. The group laughed, realizing that someone had a Tinder match, and it was Emile's phone. Vicky felt her face turn beet red. Not again, she pleaded. Please, not again, she thought. At home, she downloaded Tinder to see if her husband had an account, and Emile accused her of not trusting him. Well, damn right, you lying piece of crap. She asked him why he was on Tinder. It was innocent. Quote, "My mates stuck it on me for a laugh," he sighed, exasperated with her. "You just have issues," he added, blaming my suspicions on the infidelity in my first marriage. And his comment stung. End quote. He announced that he would be going away for the weekend on a work-related ski trip. Well, the fact was, there were indeed a lot of trainings scheduled for November and December. And Vicky, who was very pregnant, certainly couldn't ski. But he suggested that she come for a few days, likely knowing that they had no babysitter for April. And Vicky felt low. She would be alone and was still fearful that something could go wrong with the pregnancy. Just lost, she had fallen in love with a man who was very different from who Emile was now. She longed for him to choose his family over skiing and to stay and reassure her. But he left, and his texts were cold and distant. She did a lot of crying, uncertain about why this was happening. And if he did call, he would call wanting to speak to April and not to her. Oh, unless it was to engage in sexting. The reality was that Emile was hopeless with money. With childbirth approaching, Vicky wanted peace of mind knowing that if something were to happen to her, the children would be taken care of. In December, she updated her will to divide her estate between their kids. Emile, who would receive housing and support from the Army and had a stable job, he should be financially secure. Home just 2 days before Christmas, Emile was dismissive of Vicky, and he was glued to his phone, ignoring her attempts to have a conversation. His clothes reeked of smoke, yet he flatly denied smoking. And later, Vicky discovered a pack of cigarettes in his coat pocket. Her husband was a liar. He had time off for the Christmas break, and Vicky hoped that they would reconnect without distractions. They went to her stepsister's place for the holiday, and Emile remained buried in his phone, ignoring his in-laws. Vicky suggested, "Hey, let's go for a walk," but he didn't even look up. Who was occupying his attention? Catching a glimpse at the screen, she saw the name Stephanie pop up, and her heart sank. On Christmas morning, April and Vicky gave Emile his stocking filled with gifts and a card that April had made for him. Emile's expression fell when he realized he had no gift for his wife. He had ordered a few things, but they hadn't arrived. Vicky knew these were more lies. As everyone opened their presents, Vicky sat there, humiliated and empty-handed. Her husband hadn't even gotten her a card. It was one of the worst days of her life, and it only got worse when Emile casually announced that he would be going away for a few weeks over New Year's. He said it was work, specifically to run a course in Germany. But Vicky knew that no one works over New Year's, not even the reserves. He claimed this would also go towards him getting his British passport. Suspicious, Vicky sensed that something was off, but being 7 months pregnant made her sick thinking about this. She asked him not to be gone too long because they needed to pick a name for their baby, and he shrugged. He had set off on this holiday when Lloyd's bank called to inform her about insufficient funds. Emile had tried to purchase an airplane ticket using her card. Calling him, he insisted that this was a last-minute trip and that work would reimburse him. Quote, "I realized my husband doesn't love me and I am trapped." End quote. Emile was gone and hadn't called her. Fretting about him, Vicky reached out to a friend who had been stationed at the same German base, Paderborn. She learned that this was a large camp with excellent Wi-Fi. And then Vicky began second-guessing her decision to involve her friend in her personal drama. It was disheartening to realize that while Emile had a strong signal, he had never bothered to reach out to her. She threw herself into work and focused on her impending motherhood and her daughter. A few days later, Emile contacted her, saying that Paderborn had terrible cell reception with no Wi-Fi, so she probably wouldn't hear from him that much. Liar. Disgusted and heartsick, Vicky began to wonder if she wanted to hear from him at all. Her friend Antoinette refused to let Vicky spend New Year's Eve alone, and so she invited her to her dinner party. Vicky and April went, having a wonderful time, and everyone commented on how adorable April was. However, as Vicky drove home, she was overcome with loneliness. Emile should have been there with them. He shouldn't want to miss this, the last New Year's Eve as a trio. She vowed to focus on the positive and gently placed April in her bed, kissing her forehead. Turning on the TV, Vicky caught the crowd's mid-countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! As Big Ben chimed in the background. She looked at her phone, waiting for a text from Emile. By 2 a.m., she finally gave up. Quote, "By the time I wake up, his message will be there," she told herself. End quote. And waking up the next morning, Vicky grabbed her phone, and there was nothing from Emile. Nothing. Later that afternoon, she received a Happy New Year message from him, but chose to ignore it. And an hour he responded, quote, "Oh, be like that then." End quote. Vicky felt a surge of anger. She wasn't naive. She suspected he was up to something, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. Was he with that Stephanie? And the thought left her feeling devastated. And sharing her concern with her friends was tough. When they came over, Emile positioned himself among them, even when he wasn't part of the conversation. One of the women jokingly commented, quote, "Can't you get rid of your husband? How can we have a good gossip with a man in the room?" End quote. Vicky was afraid of being completely honest about her marriage, concerned that her friends would urge her to leave him. She questioned how would she manage on her own if that happened. And Emile was also cagey. He logged into Vicky's iPad and noted several sarcastic messages that she had sent about him. And when she asked him why on earth he was in her iPad, he blamed it on April, claiming that she had pushed some buttons and he had inadvertently seen it. Absolutely desperate, Vicky texted Emile, telling him that she loved him more than ever, but he was pushing her away. There was no response. When he did finally return home after 2 weeks abroad, he interacted with April but ignored Vicky. Sitting on the sofa and silently watching a movie, she noticed her phone indicated an email had arrived, and it was from Emile. He said that emailing her was easier since Vicky was far too emotional for a face-to-face conversation. He wrote he wasn't sure how he felt about their marriage, and the list of grievances that she had against him flooded her mind. She was pregnant, he left for weeks at a time, he was reckless with money, he was having an affair. But instead of expressing her frustration, she responded, quote, You really do pick your timings, end quote. It was clear that he was uncertain about wanting to remain married, and he needed time to think, but he insisted that he would be there for her and the baby. Finally, she just asked him, "Is there someone else?" And he looked her in the eye and denied it. Then he said he was going to stay in a room at the base, and her shoulders dropped as she realized he was leaving her alone again with a 2-year-old to care for. She pleaded with him to focus on the baby, and he agreed to stick by her for the next few months, but they needed to rethink their relationship thereafter. And now he stayed at the base, stopping by on and off on the weekends. After a few weeks of this, he announced that he would be going on a military drive trip in May. Right after they would have a newborn? Emile disagreed. Not a newborn. The baby would be a few weeks old by then. Absolutely unbelievable. While using the family computer, Vicky discovered emails that he had sent to the instructor inquiring about the accommodations for the trip as he was bringing his girlfriend along, a dagger to Vicky's heart. She also found searches for sex and fetish clubs in their area, as well as locations he had recently visited. Furthermore, she saw that he had arranged to have dance lessons on Valentine's Day, a day when he left Vicky home alone with April. Brokenhearted, feeling so low, Vicky vowed to get through this pregnancy. The well-being of her unborn child was her top priority. Vicky no longer recognized herself. The competent veteran, the expert parachutist who had once exuded confidence, now no longer spoke up for herself and was filled with doubt. She couldn't believe she was putting up with such toxic behavior. She had no confidence. She doubted that she could look after herself and her children. The constant lying made her feel weak and grasping. His infidelities made her feel worthless. Whenever she questioned his actions, he twisted the situation so she felt it was her fault. How could she have chosen 2 cheating husbands? What was wrong with her? Going through the motions of daily life, she knew she needed help with the new baby. Perhaps she could convince him to be honest. Then they might have a chance to start over. She decided to give it until their wedding anniversary, just 6 months away, to see if they had a future together. A few days after Valentine's Day, Vicky went into labor around noon. Her dad said that he and Frances would start the drive down from Scotland. Emile said he'd be home after work. As Vicky walked around, the early stages of labor were both painful and slow. Emile finally arrived home, as did Dad and Frances. It was still too early to go to the hospital, and Emile was preoccupied with his phone, so he finally went to bed. Vicky woke him at 1 a.m. to let him know it was time. They settled into the hospital, and the midwife informed them that the labor had stalled, and it would take hours to restart labor, leaving Vicky screaming in pain. Through the haze, she felt Emile holding her hand, even as he continued texting with someone. Finally, their beautiful son was born, flooding Vicky's heart with love. Emile stood over in the corner, totally indifferent. She asked him if he wanted to hold the baby. Taking him, Emile cradled their little boy and still said nothing. Vicky then asked him if he loved her, but Emile gave her a blank look. Exhausted, she fell into a deep sleep. Due to the long labor, both she and the baby would remain in the hospital for the next 12 hours, and the plan was to discharge them around 8 p.m. that night. But Emile hesitated, saying it was really too late to go out. Wait, didn't he want us to come home? Well, the doctor offered to let them stay until morning and suggested that Emile could go home and get some rest. And he did. And Vicky couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't want to bring them home. But then suddenly, Emile had a change of heart, and he said he would come and get them that night. And this was the first positive thing he had said in months, and Vicky felt a glimmer of hope. That night, April stayed up and was introduced to her little brother, whom Vicky named Ben. Her face beamed with joy as she cuddled him, and when the grandparents took photos, Emile put his arm around Vicky, And the next few days were actually perfect. Dad and Frances helped out around the house, and Emile's mood improved. However, once her parents left, he reverted to being silent and distant again. When the midwife came for a postnatal visit, Vicky burst into tears. She dismissed it as baby blues, as she couldn't bring herself to tell the midwife that her husband was a lying cheat. Not long after Ben's birth, Emile announced that he was borrowing her car. This irritated Vicky because she was on maternity leave and she would like to actually use her car. And when he returned, it was reeking of cigarette smoke. Fuming, she stormed in the house, interrupting the breakfast she had made him. Quote, "Do me the courtesy of not smoking in my car," she exclaimed, end quote. And he denied having smoked. And ignoring him, she said, quote, "It's not good for me or the children, and I don't want a car that stinks of smoke." "You're accusing me of something I haven't done," he shouted, jumping up from his seat. The expression on his face was stone cold, so horrifying I couldn't forget it. His aggressive reaction to what I was saying only confirmed to me, "You always overreact when you're lying," end quote. And she turned and left the house. Any affection between them had long since vanished. He did help with the children, and he took a night feed for Vicky once a week. One night he announced that he was heading back to the barracks to sleep. Well, that's odd. It's already 10 p.m. But Emile insisted that he would avoid the morning traffic if he left now. With April sleeping upstairs, she got in bed with Ben, feeding him, and she heard Emile fumbling around in the kitchen. She figured he was making coffee for the ride. After a while, she realized he was still home and wondered what on earth he was doing. But finally, she heard the front door close as he left. The next morning, Vicky crept silently downstairs to make herself a cup of tea, careful to not wake the kids. This quiet time was so precious. Oh, all the parents out there, we know that. But she sniffed the air and caught a strong odor of gas. A pipe ran behind the food cupboard that connected to the stove, and Vicky leaned in to confirm that gas odor. She turned off the lever attached to the pipe, noticing something that looked like dried blood. Quickly, she texted Emile, asking if he had adjusted the level, because there was this dried blood, and he had cut his hand badly over the weekend, and it had bled quite a bit. Emile replied, quote, "Did you turn the stove on?" And she almost laughed, thinking, "Of course not. I'm not about to blow up the house," end quote. She opened up the window to let in fresh air, and the smell dissipated. When she tried to adjust the lever again, there was a whoosh of gas. Alarmed now, she called the repairman, and he arrived and noted that a bolt had become loose. Tightening it, he declared that everything was fixed. Then Vicky recalled reading a magazine article about a husband who tried to kill his wife. On a whim, she teased Emile, texting, quote, "Are you trying to kill me?" end quote. To her surprise, he responded defensively, chiding her for even thinking that. Well, Vicky replied that she was just joking because, there was blood on the handle and she had read this article. But she went back to her busy day with the children. She couldn't shake the thought of why Emile had reacted so strongly. How could he possibly think she was serious? Well, if Emile believed that he was being discreet, he was mistaken. Vicky confronted him once again with evidence of his cheating, and his aggressive outbursts were becoming more frequent, further convincing Vicky that he was lying. The mood in the house fluctuated depending on how Emile was feeling that day. On good days, Emile played with April, creating a warm atmosphere filled with children's laughter. On bad days, he would stomp around the house, rage, and completely ignore Vicky. And during those times, she would avoid any room that he was in. One chilly March morning at 3 a.m., questions swirled in her mind. How could she afford childcare for 2 children when she returned to work? She was shouldering all the bills, with Emile offering no support. What was she going to do? The financial issues remained a constant source of conflict, leaving her feeling trapped, and she wasn't sure how much more she could endure. As a result, she started waking up very early, savoring the solitude in the early hours while the kids slept and Emile was home. She walked the dark streets for hours, trying to untangle her thoughts about her marriage. He didn't seem to care, but they had children now. Emile was lying, cheating, and disappearing for weeks on end, and she saw no path forward. Yet she still loved him. How could she manage with her newborn all by herself? And I'm saying to myself again, Vicky, aren't you already doing that? But she just can't see it. Emile was attentive to Ben, and he was helping with the night feedings, which did give her a little bit of hope. He was home most evenings, and they would sit down to dinner as a family. She prayed that maybe they were over the worst and that things were improving. And her hopes were rewarded when an enthusiastic-sounding Emile called her. Quote, "It would be really great for us to go and jump together." End quote. Oh my God, it had been so long since he wanted to do anything together, and her heart leapt. She was delighted. Emile said he would make arrangements at the parachute center, and his tone was warm, and Vicky was so touched that he had suggested this. It had been a long time since she jumped, not since before she was pregnant with Ben, and she was apprehensive about jumping, but knowing that Emile would be there with her reassured her that she would get back into the swing of things. They went to the Netheravon Parachute Center, and she ran into her old friend Wes and handed him her parachute for him to inspect. He told her that her AAD, the automatic activation device, was out of date. Now, this device is responsible for deploying the reserve parachute if the jumper was falling too quickly, was at a low altitude, or the main failed. Without it, a jump would be dangerous, and Wes explained that he would send it out for servicing, have the batteries replaced, which meant that her parachute rig would be out of action for the next few weeks. Feeling disappointed, she asked if she could rent a kit, and Wes was more than happy to accommodate her and was thrilled to have Vicky back. She shared the good news with Emile that she could rent a kit, but she noticed him dropping his gaze. What? What was wrong? Emile couldn't find a babysitter. Disappointed, he suggested that Vicky should go ahead with her plans to jump on Saturday while he was with Ben and April. Damn it, Vicky thought to herself. She really wanted to do this together, but she didn't want to upset him. So she agreed, and he promised to come and watch, and she appreciated the smile he gave her. So a week after the gas leak, they bundled the kids into the car as April chatted away to her parents. Quote, "Mummy's jumping from high up in the sky?" she asked. "That's right," said Emile, turning to smile at Vicky. But unfortunately, the weather that Saturday was not great, and Vicky wondered if the jump would be canceled as she was filling out the necessary paperwork. Chief Instructor Mark was delighted to see Vicky, saying it had been too long, and he signed off on her paperwork. As they chatted, Vicky admitted she wasn't sure she wanted to return to instruction. It came with such responsibility, and she felt she really needed to focus more on her family. And Mark assured her that he would support her no matter what decision she made. Grateful for his understanding, Vicky realized that she would need to see how she felt after the jump. Did she still love skydiving? She wasn't sure, and it did take her away from the family. While retrieving her family, Vicky went over to the kit store to get a parachute, choosing a small one. A woman nearby paused, asking if Vicky was allowed to have the smaller chute, since the smaller parachute meant a quicker fall. Wes assured the woman that this was fine and that Vicky, an expert, could handle herself. Emile picked up the parachute and swung it over his shoulder. And then April announced she had to go potty. While Vicky was buying her ticket, Emile took his daughter and bounced away, while Vicky cradled Ben in her arms. To her surprise, Vicky realized she knew very few people at the parachute center. So much had changed since her last jump. Then she wondered what was taking them so long as she headed towards the restrooms. Now, there was one main door that led to 3 others, one for women, one for men, and a shower room. Upon opening the first door, she saw April happily chatting away with Emile, and smiling, she returned back to the reception area. Still waiting, Vicky saw that the weather had turned worse and the jump was canceled. With April in tow, they took 5, maybe 10 minutes for the potty run. Emile suggested that Vicky just stow the kit in her locker and use it when the weather cleared. Well, that was odd because that wasn't the procedure. She should just turn it in and get one when she was ready. But again, she wanted to agree with Emile, and the kids were getting more restless and now hungry. So following his suggestion, she tucked the kit into her locker. She planned to come back the next day to complete the jump, and she also had a birthday party to attend that afternoon. So if she didn't make it back, she could always just return the kit later. At home, the kids were fed, with Emile bathing April, while Vicky settled Ben in for the night. And she pleaded with her little son, "Please sleep tonight, please." Afterward, she plopped down next to Emile on the sofa, and he asked her what she wanted to watch, placing his hand affectionately on her leg. She nearly fell off the sofa in shock. Wow, things were really looking up. Vicky was happily enjoying the cozy atmosphere in her home for the first time in a long while, and it felt like maybe she could have her perfect family. And then Ben's wail woke her in the wee hours of the night as she tried to settle him down. She knew she was going to be exhausted. Should she just cancel the jump for Sunday? Was this a sign? And she was correct. By sunrise, she had finally gotten Ben down to sleep. And when she came downstairs, Emile was enjoying a cup of tea. It was Easter Sunday, April 5th, 2015. After hearing about Ben's tough night and Vicky's doubts, he suggested, well, go now and jump while Ben's asleep. He would stay with the kids, and that would give her plenty of time to prepare for the party later. Though a little reluctant, she thought that since the jump was on her mind, she might as well go and get it over with to stop worrying so she can enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Giving April a big hug, she headed over to the parachute center, her nerves taut with tension. She really wanted Emile there, but he had planned this for her and she just had to see it through. Retrieving her kit from her locker, she made her way to the hangar. After waiting just 10 minutes, she joined the other jumpers in the plane, where they were all checked and given the green light, good to go, with thumbs up. Vicky took her place in the queue, but soon they were instructed to stand down. Gray skies had become too ominous. Good, Vicky thought. She had a bad feeling about this jump, maybe a premonition. Going back inside, she texted Emile about the weather and the delay, and he advised her to just wait a while. It might clear up and she could catch a ride later. Now, this is also a rare moment, being out without a toddler, so she decided to enjoy it and live in the moment. She learned that Ben had already consumed the milk she had expressed, and her engorged breasts needed some relief, so Vicky headed to the shower area to express more. And Ben would need this later that night when she went to the party. She was genuinely amazed at how supportive Emile had been, especially knowing that she was nervous. Quote, "He seems to really care about this," I thought, seeing how much of an interest Emile was taking. "And I can't give up now. I knew that if I didn't jump now, it could be months before I'd get another chance." End quote. And then the call came. They were going to do a hop and pop, a low-level lift. The plane would only be flying up to the cloud base, reaching 5,000 feet at the most. Grabbing her kit, she boarded the plane, but a wave of regret washed over her as she sat down. I don't want to be here, she realized, wishing she could just stand and run out of the plane. She couldn't figure out why, but everything felt wrong, and that nagging feeling of sixth sense crept back in her mind. I shouldn't be here. With her eyes welling up in tears, she slid the helmet over her head so no one would see. She began to shake and closed her eyes in fear of vomiting, and she chastised herself. She was an experienced jumper. Stop this. But the dread would not ease. She thought about her children, especially 5-week-old Ben, home waiting for her. And today was her first day apart from him, so that must be it. All right, let's jump and get it over with so I can go home. With clouds lower than expected, the jump master decided that only a few people could exit with each pass, so Vicky would be among the last to jump. As the door opened, the first person leaped, and the plane circled the airfield 3 times, and with each pass, more jumpers exited. Finally, it was Vicky's turn. Alone, she felt herself kick into gear, her fears pushed back. Jumping was second nature. Crouched over the door, she looked down at the 3,000 feet below, spying a field beneath her. Holding her breath, she leaped into the sky. The rush of cold air hit her face, and she fell, a sense of serenity washing over her. She had this. She spread her arms out in front of her, navigating through the air with careful control. Reaching behind her, she grabbed the toggle at the base of her rig strapped to her back and pulled it outward, deploying the parachute. The canopy billowed out, but instead of slowing down, she felt an uneven jolt. Weird, the lines attached to the parachute were badly twisted. Shock hit her for a moment, but she quickly snapped out of it. She'd encountered this before, and annoyance bubbled up. Her training kicked in as she began to unravel the twists, and it seemed to be working, but she could see there was still something wrong. Screw this, she thought, cutting away the parachute as she continued to drop. Preparing for a severe jolt from the fast-acting backup parachute, she tugged the toggle to open it, closed her eyes, and braced for the snap motion that would jerk her upward, only to feel nothing. The reserve parachute had only partially inflated, causing it to spin out of control. She was violently thrown sideways, almost upside down. Fighting against the turbulence, she desperately tugged on her risers, trying to free the twisting lines. Slowly, she began to build up momentum, and just as the lines started to untangle, the spinning intensified. Dizziness washed over her, but she continued to pull on her risers, striving to gain control of her descent. The thought of April and Ben flashed through her mind. She had to slow down. If she could figure out what was wrong, she could fix it. How could this be happening? With only half the canopy working, she pulled as hard as she could to reduce her speed. And suddenly there was a large metallic bang, and at 60 miles an hour, everything went black. Opening her eyes, Vicky noticed the air smelled like dirt. Soft ground was underneath her. I'm still alive, she thought, moving her finger slightly, then her toes. When both responded, she breathed a sigh of relief. Good, everything works. Looking around her, some people exclaimed, "Oh, thank God, Vicky!" Kneeling beside her was Kate, a friend from the center and a trained doctor. Kate quickly checked her over as a blur of people surrounded them, worry etched on their faces. The blaring klaxon of the ambulance drew closer and closer. Well, wait, was she in a helicopter? They were landing in Southampton. But Salisbury's closer, Vicky muttered weakly. Yes, but Southampton has a major trauma center, Kate explained. Vicky protested faintly that she was fine, and then succumbed to sleep again. When she woke later, she found herself being wheeled into an A&E for accident and emergency, with a crowd of doctors surrounding her. Then she was in a hospital gown, voices murmuring around her. Vicky drifted in and out of consciousness. Opening her eyes once more, she saw she was in a large hospital bed in a large A&E room, and Emile was by her side. Quote, "How are you feeling?" he asked. Wiggling her fingers and toes. "Fine," she replied. "Good, I've been here for some time," he said, end quote, as Vicky apologized for causing all this fuss. She could sense his blame, which made her feel guilty. Her head spun from the medication she was on, and she closed her eyes to block out the blurry images and the noise ringing in her ears. As they increased her ketamine, she was taken for a CT scan, and the world faded away once more. Her eyes fluttered open, and a doctor greeted her with hello, and he mentioned that her parents were on the way to the hospital. Well, Vicky was surprised because she felt fine and wondered why they needed to come, and the doctor explained what had happened, that she had suffered a bad fall. Emile then told her the kids were with Carly, his ex-wife, but her parents would be taking care of them tomorrow. And Vicky thought, wow, that was really nice of Carly. And April got along well with her older half-siblings. Vicky had actually rarely seen Carly or her kids. As the doctor detailed her injuries, Vicky learned that she had a broken pelvis that required surgery. When they adjusted her pelvis binder, she experienced a vicious stab of pain, screaming in agony, and it felt like she was being ripped in half. Glancing at Emile, she noticed he was engrossed in his phone. Later, it would be revealed that he was texting with his girlfriend. When the police asked him why he was on his phone, while Vicky, who had nearly died, was in such bad shape, he shrugged it off, claiming that she was out of it and she didn't know. It was a disturbing display of indifference, with psychopathy rearing its head. Vicky had broken most of the ribs on her right side, which caused part of her right lung to collapse. There was also the possibility that her bladder was damaged. As she gasped in disbelief, she found it hard to accept just how badly injured she really was, and the doctor said she was lucky to be alive. He mentioned she might have spinal fractures, so they had initiated full spinal care to protect her spinal cord. She blinked in shock. She had nearly died. She had come close to losing everything, including her life. She had almost left her children without a mother. Oh my God. Moving her to the ward was torturous. The extreme pain she experienced while getting on and off the gurney and into the bed was horrific. She let out involuntary animalistic screeches from the agony. The doctor assured her the worst was over, even as she noticed Emile's constant texting, which embarrassed Vicky with his apparent lack of interest. The BBC would report that while Vicky was in intensive care, Emile presented critical injury insurance forms for the doctor to sign. Vicky said, quote, "He didn't even say he loved me. He was there counting up my fractures. You get £1,000 for each break, and he was there totaling them up." End quote. Dad and Frances arrived, tears streaming down their faces when they saw how badly injured Vicky was. They had to deal with Emile, and the tension among the three of them was palatable. But despite their fears, they put on brave faces and pressed onward. The surgery on Vicky's pelvis lasted 3 hours, and her recovery began in earnest. She longed to see her children, but they were too young given the risk of nasty infections common in hospitals, especially the ICU. Emile managed to FaceTime with April, which provided some comfort. However, Ben had already changed since the last time she saw him, which broke her heart. Emile had come home from work to relieve Dad and Frances of their childcare duties, and then they would immediately head to the hospital. Vicky kept telling herself that Emile needed to be with the kids during this time. But the truth was, she needed him by her side to help her heal so she could return home. The nursing staff informed him that he could visit her anytime, regardless of the visiting hours, but he never took them up on it. Friends would comment that if their wives were in her position, they would be there as much as possible, and Vicky couldn't deny that they were right. His attitude towards her didn't make sense. People do cope with things in different ways, but that felt far too generous. He was just being a selfish jerk again. And Vicky admitted to using the powerful fentanyl button on her IV to simply forget where she was. All right, so let's recap a minute. Both of Victoria Cilliers' parachutes failed, which is incredibly rare. According to data from the United States Parachute Association, in 2022, there were 3.9 million jumps, with 20 recorded as fatal skydiving accidents. This results in a rate of 0.51 fatalities per 100,000 jumps. For tandem dives, where the student and the instructor jump together, there was 1 student fatality for every 500,000 jumps over the course of a decade, which equates to 0.0002%. In 2022, 2 fatalities were attributed to equipment issues. Another 10% were related to medical problems, and 80% were due to intentional or unintentional human errors made by experienced license holders who miscalculated. Okay, so according to skydivemonroe.com, there are 2 types of malfunctions, total and partial. A total malfunction occurs when the parachute fails to activate or is activated but does not deploy. A partial malfunction happens when the parachute deploys but is not landable. And there are 3 basic reasons for these malfunctions: improper or careless packing, poor or unstable body positions, and a malfunction. As part of their training, all skydivers are taught the correct procedures for packing parachutes and proper body position for successful deployment. But despite all of this, malfunctions can still occur. Now, a skydiving rig resembles a backpack, and it contains 2 parachutes, the main parachute and the reserve parachute, which serves as the backup. The reserve parachute is only used if the main parachute malfunctions. Only FAA-certified professional parachute riggers are authorized to pack the reserve chute. Additionally, reserve parachutes must be repacked every 180 days, regardless of whether they have been used or not. And we saw that when Vicky was going to go jump, her parachute needed to be processed, new batteries and all of this, and that's why she had to rent a rig. Every skydiver is taught how to recognize a safe landing canopy. They look, they ask themselves, is the canopy inflated? Is it open? Is it fully inflated? Is it rectangular in shape? Is it maneuverable with toggles? If the answer to any of those questions is no, it indicates that the main parachute has malfunctioned and emergency procedures are initiated. So what do? There's a parachute malfunction. You cut away the failed main parachute and you deploy the backup reserve. This process must occur at a minimum altitude of 2,500 feet or 762 meters for students and A license holders, and no lower than 1,800 feet or 549 meters for B and D licensed skydivers. So you have a little bit more leeway there as an experienced skydiver. The likelihood of both the main and reserve parachute failing is extremely low. Reserve parachutes are packed with great care, making their failure almost non-existent. Additionally, if a skydiver becomes unconscious, the AAD, the automatic activation device, will automatically deploy the reserve parachute. So it's important to be aware of that. Okay, continuing Vicky's story. Medically, Vicky's team was concerned about the burst fracture of her T8 vertebrae, in addition to 3 broken lumbar vertebrae. The condition was potentially unstable, and she was facing the prospect of spending 3 months in the hospital. Vicky was devastated. There is no way she could endure that length of time away from her life and kids. The alternative was surgery, but the medical team did not recommend it. Despite this, Vicky was insistent that she wanted the surgery, and the doctor agreed to reassess her situation. A few days later, Emile informed her that the doctor was still opposed to the surgery, which infuriated Vicky. The doctor had spoken to Emile, but not her. Vicky was the one with medical training, not Emile, and it was her body at stake, and she demanded a second opinion. Good for her, speaking up for herself. The second spinal surgeon explained that they needed to determine if her spine was stable. To do this, they would need to get her upright in a brace and conduct weight-bearing x-rays. They needed to assess whether the vertebrae were pressing down, which would indicate instability, or if they remained in place, suggesting stability. If the vertebrae were pressing down, he could surgically stabilize them. The doctor's manner was engaging and professional, and he took her concerns seriously, and Vicky agreed to proceed with the plan. First, however, they needed to get her off the fentanyl, so Vicky requested that the nurse remove the fentanyl pump and switch to oral pain management. The physical therapist then began to help Vicky get into the brace, which felt like a strange juxtaposition for her, the physio being assisted. As she sat up, she felt awful. Her head was spinning, and her body had grown accustomed to lying down. She lasted less than 2 minutes in that position. But determined to get this x-ray, Vicky pushed herself. As a physiotherapist, she kept her joints moving, practiced hip movements, and focused on her breathing. And each time she sat up, she managed to stay a little bit longer through sheer determination. By the time the x-ray was scheduled, Vicky had successfully sat up and swung her legs to the side of the bed, astounding the spinal surgeon. She was willing to do whatever it took to get back to her babies. And Emile was nowhere to be seen. In the trauma unit, Vicky had different teams to address each of her issues: pain management, nutrition, and physiotherapy, along with her key worker, a supportive nurse who served as her main point of contact for all medical matters. And she was present when the spinal surgeon arrived with her x-ray results. Anxiously awaiting the news, he assured Vicky that her spine was stable and that she would require no further surgery. Oh, this was great news, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her. One more hurdle overcome. The surgeon also suggested that Vicky speak with a psychologist, as she had experienced significant physical and emotional trauma. When the psychologist came to talk to her, her wonderful husband Emile made a rare appearance and stayed for the conversation. And Vicky felt she couldn't ask him to leave, knowing he would later use it against her if she complained about his infrequent visits to the hospital. When asked about the state of their marriage, Vicky lied and said that everything was fine, since the psychologist was not there to resolve her marital difficulties. Vicky never booked another appointment. Instead, she chose to focus on her healing and regaining her strength. Now, due to her injury, Vicky couldn't put any pressure on her right leg. She could only touch her toe to the ground for balance. And she progressed from using a large frame device to a Zimmer frame, which is like a walker, and eventually crutches. Finally, she achieved the independence of going to the bathroom by herself. And her next challenge was tackling stairs. Wearing a brace to keep her back straight, her movements were slow and rigid, but Vicky was determined to get home to her kids, the driving force behind her recovery. They began discussing discharge dates as Vicky beamed with joy. Her determination and effort had reduced her expected 3-month hospital stay to just 2 weeks. She called Emile to let him know she would be coming home in a few days, and he replied that he was too busy at work to pick her up. Deflated, she longed to see her kids, his kids. 3 days later, Emile finally managed to pick Vicky up from the hospital, fitting this into his busy schedule. Still in her brace and on crutches, she slowly made their way into their home, and April threw her arms around Vicky's legs, crying, "Mommy!" Overwhelmed with happiness, Vicky burst into tears as Dad came forward to greet her, carrying Ben. However, worry loomed over her. Now that she was home, Dad and Frances would be returning to Scotland. How would she manage everything alone? Well, in the hospital, everything had been taken care of for her, and she didn't want to add to Emile's stress. No, of course not. We wouldn't want to stress him out. She navigated the scares on her bum, sliding up step by step, but then realized when she got to the top, she wasn't going to be able to pull herself up. So Emile sighed and came up to give her a hand, leaving Vicky feeling like an inconvenience. I hope you are as annoyed with him as I am. Now, Vicky would help with the kids by giving her 2-month-old son his nightly bottle, needing to stand while cradling him. But Emile was in a bad mood because he had to get up and get that bottle from the kitchen. He took Ben from her and told her to just go back to sleep since he was already awake, and Vicky felt completely worthless. However, things did improve after a few days of practice, and Emile's mood brightened when Dad and Frances left. Then a call came from the British Parachute Association requesting a visit. Jeff Montgomery, who Vicky had worked with at Netheravon, arrived with Tony, an instructor. They informed Vicky and Emile that they were opening an investigation into her accident. Surprised, Vicky had been so focused on recovering, she hadn't given the accident much thought. Had anyone mentioned this to her? And she shrugged and said, "No, why?" Quote, "There were slinks missing in your parachute," Tony told me. I was stunned. That's impossible. Tony explained that they hypothesized that it was pressure from the brake line pushing against the other lines that kept the parachute inflated enough for you to survive. Essentially, it's a surprise that you survived. You were a hair's breadth away from being killed. End quote. Jeff was determined to figure out what went wrong. All right, so parachute slinks. They are fabric components that connect a parachute canopy's suspension lines to the risers. They replace traditional metal links as they're more durable and can be reused to reduce damage to the slider grommets, meaning that the suspension lines last longer. Vicky's slinks hadn't failed. They were missing, which was impossible. A few days later, Vicky's friend Alex called to inform her that the chief instructor and everyone else at the parachute center were deeply concerned about the recent accident. They suspected that it may not have been an accident at all, and Vicky's jaw dropped at the news. They planned to report it to the police for a thorough investigation, but they needed Vicky's permission first. Vicky hesitated. She worried that Emile would blame her if the situation escalated, so she wanted to discuss it with him first. After filling Emile in on the situation, he came over to her, wrapped his arm affectionately around her shoulders, and encouraged her to go ahead with the report. Quote, "Even if it turns out to be nothing, putting everyone at the parachute center's minds at rest will be a good thing." End quote. Vicky then called Alex to share their decision to inform the police. Learning there would be an investigation, Alex was relieved and assured her that they would report it right away. And this marks the point where the police become involved in the case. It turns out another friend of Vicky's had already contacted law enforcement, telling them that the Cilliers' marriage was not as perfect as it appeared from the outside, specifically that there were strains and financial problems. Constable Maddie Hanna realized that she would need to speak with both Victoria and Emile Cilliers. The thought that the fall might not have been an accident began to resonate in Vicky's mind. Could it be foul play? Was the parachute tampered with? It was a terrifying idea, but Vicky struggled to believe it. It seemed like just a freak accident. Perhaps someone had a grievance with the parachute center. Over the next 2 weeks, Vicky heard nothing more, leading her to assume that the police found no evidence of foul play. Meanwhile, she started planning April's Frozen-themed birthday party with her friends, which would include a bouncy house. During that party, Emile helped Ben, encouraging Vicky to enjoy her time with April. His behavior was in stark contrast to the aloof jerk he had been during Christmas and after Ben was born. Once again, he seemed like a completely different person. By the end of the day, Vicky had had a lot of fun, but she was exhausted, and Emile put Ben to bed, bathed April, and settled her down. When he walked into the living room, he found Vicky lying flat on her back on the sofa, and he chuckled and said, quote, "You'd be lost without me." And Vicky agreed that that was absolutely true, end quote. It had taken some time, but things between them appeared to be improving. He was even laughing. 2 days later, Emile ran down the stairs shouting that he was late for work and he would see them tonight. But Emile never came home. There was a knock at the door, and Vicky saw 2 men, Detective Inspector Paul Franklin and Mark from the Wiltshire Police. Concerned for Emile, Vicky hoped that he was all right, and the detectives explained that her husband had been arrested. Vicky was stunned. Why? She asked. She learned that the arrest was for suspicion of attempted murder, specifically of Victoria Cilliers. The words echoed in Vicky's mind as she struggled to comprehend the situation. What on earth? Well, she needed to speak to Emile, but her request was denied. Confused and anxious, she asked why they suspected him. And they said they had spoken with everyone who might possibly be involved, but could not share more details at this time. And spoiler, Vicky would learn almost nothing about the case or the evidence for the next few years. Yes, years. Meanwhile, she grappled with a disturbing thought. How could the man I married and had children with do something so inherently evil to me? She certainly recognized that Emile had his faults, but this? No, this was unbelievable. Vicky had no idea when she would be able to speak to Emile again, and it scared her to realize that she was on her own with a 3-year-old and small baby. She would need to call her dad, who was also in shock at the news. And guess what? He and Frances drove down again from Scotland. It is really important to note here that Vicky does not see herself as a victim. She cannot believe that Emile could do something so terrible. The police must have made a grave mistake. And research shows that 51% of victims of coercive control do not see themselves as victims. And I will pause our look into the case of the parachute plot murder here. I will be back with part 3 shortly, when we will begin the investigation in earnest, as Vicky struggles to process what is happening as more charges are forthcoming. And our next book is Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter by Troy A. Hillman. Hot off the presses, this engaging true crime book was just published on October 7th, 2025. So you need to read this one with me. Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter is an extraordinary, detailed inside story of how an ex-CPA turned detective, Troy Hillman, and an elite team of detectives forged a cold case unit determined to solve a brutal double murder that had haunted Phoenix, Arizona for 2 decades. Thank you for listening. We will get back to Vicky's story shortly. I do have some special episodes in the works that will be dropping on our off weeks as I strive to give you fascinating content on the best true crime books. I appreciate you joining me on this journey. I do not want to do this without you. Don't forget, if you're going to CRIMECON 2026 in Las Vegas, you can use my code, one word, lowercase letters, murdershelf, to save 10% on your badge. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with friends, with family, and leave a positive 5-star review. All of my sources, photographs, articles, recipe, and drink links are on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, November 2025. And if you have any questions, contact me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com or follow me on X, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Additionally, you can join my Patreon for $2 to $4 a month and help choose the next book I feature and enjoy my serial killer class. See you in 2 weeks with the conclusion of I Survived by Victoria Cilliers. What a story. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.